All right, so today I'm going to be piecing together the Snowbirds pattern. This is by Sandy Gervais, and this is a pieces from my heart quilt pattern. I received this and the fabric in one of my Fab Stash boxes from Reb's Fab Stash. If you've received this kit, you'll be able to sew it along with me. And if you don't have the same kit, you could grab the pattern, or maybe you already have the pattern, so just grab some fabric and let's sew along together. So everything I have here is just the cuts from page 1. So everything you see on the design board and here. Now what this is page 1, the cutting and piecing birds, and this is all from the number 1 that's marked there. So these colored portions are the section for the bird body, and it's under the darker segment that says from the gray snowflake charm pack. So here I have the bird body, the connector square for the beak, the connector square for the tail, and then the half square triangle unit. So you cut a square and then cut it from corner to corner. And these 3 here are all these same cuts because there's going to be the 4 birds. The fabric here is from the various light backgrounds, and you have 4 of them, 4, 12, 2, and that's because these are cut in diagonal after you cut the square. So it looks like 4, but it's really from 2 squares. And then 8. These were all shown in order that they are cut in the pattern. So these are all the cuts we're going to start with to get these birds pieced together. Okay, so we're going to lay out the bird bodies, and then we're going to take a connector square. These are my connector squares, and I'm not going to try to make them look like they're the same ones or anything. I'm just going to grab some and lay them out. You know, if you want to, because these are the same, if you want to make sure different ones end up on each bird, you could just place them down in different spots. Okay, and then we're going to sew from corner to corner on all of them. And it's a pretty good diagram in the pattern to show kind of how that is done. So I'm going to do that on all these, and then I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch away from them and press them. All right, so here is that first step for creating the bird bodies done. And so now I'm going to move on to the next step. So we're going to need those first connectors, the second connectors that we cut. So we're going to need the 4 of those. So I'm going to lay those out. And then we're going to need the square from each of them, the larger square from each color we have here. Now you got to pay very close attention to the diagram here, because 2 of the birds are going to have the tail on one side and 2 on the other. You are going to want to pay attention to what colors you're putting where. If you're doing like the green and yellow on one side and blue on the red on the other, just keep note of it for your bird later, because it's going to orient which way they're facing. So I'm going to sew along the diagonal on all of these, trim a 1/4 inch away from the stitch line, and press them all as well. All right, so here are the tails all trimmed and pressed. And now this next step is going to take, I think, a little bit of mental gymnastics, because we are going to be working on the beak. The position of the beak is going to depend on what color bird we're working with and which way we now have it facing, because of the way we have the tail positioned. So for this, we're going to need 4 of our kind of smaller triangles, and I have, because we have 12 of them, because it's going to help make up the background here, I do have it in a couple different prints, so I'm going to make sure I have a variety of the 4 prints here. And then we are going to get that smaller square out. For each of these, we're either going to have it positioned on the left or the right side of this rectangle. I'm going to need to look over for each color to see which side that will need to be on. So for example, for the yellow, the bird's beak's going to be on the opposite side of the tail. So I'm going to want it on the left side so that when it folds over in half, it's making the beak there. So for my yellow and green, I'm going to need it sewn on the left side of the rectangle. And then for my red and blue, it's going to be on the right side. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm just kind of matching it up to the way the bird is situated. So I'm going to sew corner to corner on the diagonal, trim a 1/4 inch away, and then press them open. So kind of having the birds laid out so that you can really look at it and see how it needs to be positioned really is going to help you make sure you're sewing them in the right way. So you could do them one at a time to make sure you feel comfortable in having everything situated. But if you sew them on the wrong side, I think it would look fine if the birds were all scrappy as well too. So I think it'll be okay either way, but if you really want them to be all the same color, then just make sure that you're checking and positioning everything correctly for each bird. All right, so I have the bird beak trimmed and pressed in place. Now I moved to one of my larger design boards so I could kind of keep everything together. So the last thing we need to do to prep for these birds is to bring our triangle that's a print to match our bird with a background, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, and we only need to do this for one of each of the patterns. So we do have some leftover triangles there. So I'm going to sew all these right sides together right along the diagonal and press them. And then the only thing we have left after that is laying out the rest of our pieces to bring this bird together. So we're going to have a few of these triangles that are going around here. So you can just lay them out however you would like to bring each of the squares together. And then our longer one, after we get the final bird tail in place, is going to go along the top of all of them. So I'll show you, of course, one at a time, you know, on one block, how to piece it all together. But just so you get an idea, that is how the blocks are all going to come together. I'm going to set these to the side since you don't need them. Now I'm going to go sew these half square triangles, press them, and then I'll show you one block laid out and how I am going to sew it together. All right, so here are all my birds laid out. So I'm going to start with one of them and show you how to piece them together. So we have the bird beak section, the bird body, the tail, the half square triangle that we finished for the tail. Now I did trim off the dog ears just to make it a little bit easier for me. Then we have just some other rectangles to help piece everything in this block together. So the first segment that's going to be sewn together is this bottom rectangle onto the bottom of the bird body. So sew across and sew a 1/4 inch seam. Then it's going to get pressed, and then we can add on the beak and the segment that's going to go under the tail. Press both of those. You'll need to sew your tail half square triangle on to that other longer rectangle. Press it, then you can fold it down onto this bottom segment that would be all sewed, and then finally sew on the top rectangle to all of those. All right, so I have my birds here. On page 2, we're going to work through finishing off the birds and bringing the quilt top together. So the first thing we could do is lay out the wings for the birds, and I actually cut all of mine in similar colors but just a little bit contrasting, and these say they're just raw appliqued on. I'm probably going to do this step after I complete the top. That is the first part of page 2. So I'm going to set these to the side. Then here are all the rest of my cuts. So I have sashing here, and then this is actually the center of sashing. So I have these sashing pieces. And then these are all pieced rectangles for a second pieced lighter border. So this pieced lighter border would go around as well. So you just lay them out any way that you would like them to look. And then we have this solid inner border. And then we would have a pieced kind of border going between the pattern pieces and the solid pieces for an outer border. These are the eyes for the bird, their little buttons. So here is what the next set of layout looks like. So the button eye and the wing I will put on later after I get everything pieced together. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring together the bottom 2 birds with the sashing and the top 2 birds with the sashing, and then I'll piece together a sashing, the kind of center sashing square in the next sashing. Then I'll bring all of it together. I'll piece these 3 top and bottom pieced lighter border, attach those on, and I'll need to measure it to make sure it fits before I attach it on. Then I'll do the sides. I'll put on the inner border. I'll piece up these and put them on as well. So essentially, I think the hardest part of this quilt is done with the birds, but I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this put together and we'll see how it looks. All right, so now that I have the inner portion of the birds pieced together, I'm going to take the top and bottom light piece border and I'm going to trim them to 11.5 inches. Since that is the size we are looking for. Let's see what we have. So we have 14 inches, so I'm going to trim a little bit off of each side. So I don't want one side to be completely different than the other. All right, so now I'm going to add one of these onto the top and bottom. So I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, and then I will measure and add on the sides after the top and bottom is pressed. All right, now that the center portion is pieced again, we are going to add a solid strip onto the bottom and the top of this project. Then I'll press the seams and put these side pieces on, and then after that all we'll have left is that fun border piece. All right, now we just need to add on the pieced outer border. So when you sew on the top and bottom border. Notice that one side should start with the solid. So if my top left is going to start with a solid, my bottom right is going to start with one of the pattern pieces. And that'll just make sure that you get the proper pattern going all the way around. See, it'll end with a pattern and then start with a solid on the side border. So just a little tip there. So I'm going to go sew these on with a 1/4 inch seam, press them, and then add these sides on. Then the top will be finished. It'll be all pieced together. All right, so here is my Snowbirds quilt top. It is pretty much finished. I do need to still applique around the bird wings. Right now, I just have it held in place with this acorn piecing glue. So it's typically used for seam aligning seams before you sew together instead of using pins. You can use it for applique, however. So I just have it in place with that and waiting for it to dry. And then I do need to sew the buttons eyes in place. I actually tack them in place with the glue too. I'm hoping it'll hold it in place so it doesn't shift around when I'm trying to sew those on. But otherwise, I have everything completely finished for the top. It turned out pretty cute. There are a few things that I wish were different in the pattern. I wish once the bird blocks were brought together that we had a finished size for them so I could square them up a little bit better. But other than that, that is my main complaint with the piecing of this. It would be nice if there was a complete cut list as well instead of reading through the entire pattern to get all of the cut lists. I do wish that it mentioned that the half square triangle piece that we weren't using both of them because I was kind of confused by that at first. But otherwise, the quilt came together very, very nicely, and it is a really cute block. If you wanted to make it larger, I think you could definitely just keep this inner, the inner 4 birds and keep adding it on until you got a quilt the size you want. But this is a pretty cute little wall hanging. It will look great in the spring, I think, up on a wall. All right, so hopefully this helped you piecing together your quilt top, and it was fun for me to put it together. Hopefully you get yours together and enjoy it as well. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.